This battlefield animation is a depiction of the fighting at the Middle Railroad Cut, with a focus on the charge of the 6th Wisconsin and the actions of Lieutenant Roeder's single artillery piece. In his new book, Strong Men of the Regiment Sobbed Like Children, John Reynolds' 1st Corps at Gettysburg on July 1, 1863, author John Michael Priest meticulously describes the conflict. Most of the following video narration is taken from Chapter 6 and is used with the permission of the publisher, Savas Beatie. The animation itself has been extracted from the acclaimed Gettysburg Animated Battle Map app, an 8-year project that shows every minute of fighting over the 3 days of the battle in covering a 56-square-mile battlefield. More information on this app can be found at the end of this video or by visiting savasbeatie.com. Author John Priest first references the 6th Wisconsin of Meredith's brigade, Wadsworth's division, of the 1st Corps when describing the brigade's approach into the fields west of the Lutheran Seminary. He writes, "The 2nd Wisconsin took the lead, followed by the 7th Wisconsin and the 24th Michigan. Lieutenant Colonel Rufus Dawes's 6th Wisconsin, having rotated to the rear of their brigade, finished out the column. They took up a position in reserve, while the bulk of the Iron Brigade fiercely battled it out with Archer's brigade in Herbst Woods." When General Reynolds is killed, General Doubleday assumes command of the 1st Corps. Of Doubleday and his headquarters staff, Priest writes, "By 10:40 a.m., they reached the field in front of Reverend Schmucker's house, where Doubleday found himself in the middle of a chaotic situation. Doubleday spied the 6th Wisconsin moving onto the crowded field and directed it to stop. Dawes did as directed and commanded his men to lie down. Moments later, the brigade guard joined the 6th. Dawes split the guard, which consisted of 20 enlisted men from each regiment in the brigade, into 2 companies. Priest describes in detail how they were positioned on the opposite flanks of the regiment. As the Iron Brigade was taking control of the fight for Herbst Woods, the North Carolina and Mississippi regiments of Davis's brigade were having much better success against 3 of General Cutler's regiments north of, and Hall's battery just to the south of, the unfinished railroad bed. The Mississippians and Tar Heels crested the middle ridge in pursuit of Cutler's broken regiments about the same time that General Buford and his staff reached the western face of Shedd's Woods to survey the situation. Buford immediately dispatched an aide to fetch one of Califf's guns to stabilize the line, sweep the railroad cut, and drive out the skirmishers of the 42nd Mississippi, harassing Hall's retreating battery, dispatching Lieutenant John Roeder and his right gun. Of Roeder's courageous gun, he writes, "The Mississippians spotted John Roeder's artillery piece rattled into position and unlimber. The Magnolia State soldiers cut loose with what one account claimed was deadly fire and charged." Vividly describing the efforts of Roeder's wounded crew to load their gun with double canister and fire in the face of the charge, Priest states, "The artillerists heard the Rebs scream, 'There's a piece, let's take it,' as another Union gunner yanked the lanyard. The whizzing canister rounds flew high and inflicted minimal casualties on the Mississippians. The windy roar of the flying lead balls did, however, send them scrambling back as fast as they could." The author then turns his attention back to the 6th Wisconsin, stating, "Immediately west of the seminary and some 80 rods south of the Chambersburg pike, Dawes observed Cutler's brigade streaming southeast over the first ridge west of Shedd's Woods and toward the low ground west of the Thompson place. Dawes simultaneously caught a glimpse of Hall's 4 guns in the distance on the north side of the road, thundering east toward the same place. While the column ran parallel to the Chambersburg pike, Dawes belted out the command to double quick to the rail fence. Lieutenant Harris, commanding the left half of the brigade guard, passed by the right flank of the immobile 95th New York. "For God's sake," Harris accosted them, "why don't you move forward and join our left?" None of the New Yorkers responded to the plea. The 2nd Mississippi watched Cutler's broken regiments reform inside Shedd's Woods line. Major Bellow and Major Blair decided their course of action, to charge the 6th Wisconsin. The change in front destroyed any remnants of organized regimental formations. "All the men were jumbled together, without regard to regiment or company," Blair wrote in 1888. "The 2nd, the 42nd, and probably the 55th North Carolina were one mass of men." The west end of the line stumbled into the deep part of the cut. The left ended up in the shallow eastern part of the excavation. The cut was not the defensive position the Confederates hoped it might be. Except for the left wing of the 2nd Regiment, most of the Mississippians could not see over the high side of the deep middle cut to fire at the more organized and better controlled Yankees, much less advance. The Badgers, meanwhile, had organized themselves on the southern side of the pike. Dawes shouted at the top of his voice, "Forward!" The infantrymen clambered over the rails under a slow but steady fire and reformed. Once organized, they advanced, firing and loading by ranks as they inched forward. The sudden disappearance of the rebels surprised Lieutenant Harris. It was as if the ground had opened up, and in the confusion and smoke and noise, the enemy had simply vanished. Harris was unaware of the cut's existence and had hoped for a stand-up fight in the open. Within about 165 feet of the cut, Sergeant Fairfield noticed that the Confederates had stopped shooting. Fairfield instinctively braced himself for the inevitable volley he knew would follow the silence. The Westerners had not traversed half the distance to the cut when the Mississippians emptied a devastating volley into them. Taken back by the ferocity of the incoming rounds, Dawes realized his small regiment had run into a formidable line. About 100 or so men were approaching his left flank from the south. "I did not know or care where they came from, but was rejoiced to see them," he later explained. Dawes rushed to the line and encountered Major Pyle and his small 95th New York. "We must charge. Are you with us?" "Charge it is," Pyle firmly responded. The Wisconsinites surged ahead before the New Yorkers had completely come alongside. The 14th Brooklyn, trailing behind the right rear of the 95th, remained in the wake of the assault. Arthur Priest vividly narrates numerous accounts of the heavy fighting taking place, the opposing lines separated by mere feet, with the Confederates down in the cut and the Federals on the crest above them. "Surrender!" the Westerners yelled above the din. "Throw over your arms!" To their amazement, a considerable number of Confederates complied by grounding their weapons and waving their caps in the air. Rufus Dawes pushed his way to the front of his men at the middle of the cut and stared down the 4-foot embankment at the enemy crammed together below, as his Badgers shouted, "Throw down your muskets! Down with your muskets!" "Where's the colonel of this regiment?" he shouted. Major Blair of the 2nd Mississippi stepped forward. "Here I am," Blair defiantly responded. "Who are you?" "I command this regiment. Surrender or I will fire," Dawes retorted. Without uttering a word, the dejected major surrendered his sword, and within short order 6 other Confederate officers handed their blades to Dawes. "Major," Dawes responded, "have your men fall in without arms." The infantrymen near Blair complied. The Confederates who did not surrender, in various unorganized ways and exit routes, withdrew from the Middle Railroad cut and headed to the northwest. This episode of fighting on Day 1 had come to an end. Heavy losses on both sides, but with the Federals in control of that section of the field. The time immediately following became later known as the midday lull, but within about an hour the fighting would resume and all hell would break loose here in the fields northwest of Gettysburg. More information, including purchase details for this title, can be found on the publisher's website. A live link can be found in the video description. More information on subscribing to the Gettysburg Animated Battle Map app used in this video can also be found on the Savas Beatie website and by using the live link also in the video description.